For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant, ignored by the galaxy, dismissed by those in power, tolerated only when useful, and quietly pushed aside when inconvenient. To the great powers of the stars, humans were a temporary species, loud, divided, endlessly questioning rules that had existed longer than their recorded history. Humanity argued with elders, challenged authority, and refused to accept that age alone conferred wisdom. That defiance earned them attention at first, and irritation soon after. But irritation was not the same as fear. By galactic standards, humanity was unimpressive. Their fleets were small. Their technology was adaptive but inelegant. Their political systems were chaotic, fragmented, and inefficient. Compared to civilizations that measured time in tens of thousands of years, humans seemed brief, an energetic spark destined to burn out before it ever mattered. Analysts labeled them non-critical. Strategists labeled them manageable. Archivists labeled them forgettable. And so the galaxy forgot them. When humanity's trade slowed, it was blamed on internal dysfunction. When their colonies withdrew from shared infrastructure, it was chalked up to political infighting. When human representatives stopped appearing in council chambers, the assumption was simple and comforting. Humanity had failed. Species failed all the time. Some collapsed under their own contradictions. Some were crushed by stronger neighbors. Some simply faded when the universe stopped accommodating their growth. Humanity, with all its noise and division, seemed destined for the same quiet end. So the file was closed. No fleets were dispatched to investigate the growing silence. No observers were sent to confirm extinction. There were always more pressing matters: border disputes, economic realignments, the endless maintenance of galactic order. Humanity wasn't worth the effort. What no one understood was that humanity hadn't been fragile. They had been dependent. Dependent on trade that could be cut. Dependent on permissions that could be revoked. Dependent on systems designed by those who believed control was stability. And when those supports were taken away, something changed. Humanity did not collapse outward in chaos. They collapsed inward, shedding excess, discarding assumptions, dismantling structures that existed only to please others. The noise stopped. The broadcasts ended. The arguments faded. Not because humanity had died, but because it had started listening. Silenced by the galaxy, humans finally heard themselves clearly. They stopped trying to earn approval from ancient powers that would never see them as equals. They stopped building for prestige and began building for endurance. They stopped asking how to succeed within the galaxy's rules, and started asking how to survive when those rules failed. The silence was not weakness. It was concentration. While the galaxy mistook absence for extinction, humanity was learning how to exist without permission. How to move without lanes. How to build without trade. How to endure without allies. No one was watching. That was the mistake. Because the most dangerous moment in human history was never their wars, their divisions, or their early expansion. It was the moment the galaxy silenced them, and gave them the time, space, and necessity to become something else entirely. They silenced humanity. And in that silence, the stars began to answer. The Galactic Council tightened its grip. Not with fleets or open war, but with regulations, quiet, precise, and devastating. Humanity was placed under provisional oversight, a phrase designed to sound temporary while granting the Council near total control over every point of contact humans had with the wider galaxy. Trade was cut. Human shipping licenses were suspended, pending review. Entire classes of goods were reclassified as restricted: reactor components, medical compounds, navigation cores. Dockyards delayed clearance until fuel reserves ran low. Contracts were frozen. Credit access vanished behind layers of bureaucratic procedure engineered never to resolve. Within months, supply chains that had taken generations to build were severed. Rights were revoked. Human representatives lost their voting privileges in council chambers. Then their right to speak. Then their access entirely. Travel permits were restricted under the guise of security. Surveillance mandates were imposed for protection. Council law, ancient, flexible, and selectively enforced, was suddenly applied with ruthless efficiency. Every action was legal. Every justification immaculate. Every appeal denied. Humanity protested the only way the Council allowed, through formal channels. They cited treaties signed in good faith. Mutual defense clauses. Shared wars fought side by side. Human fleets had bled alongside Council armadas. Human engineers had rebuilt worlds that were not their own. The Council acknowledged the filings, then archived them. Sanctions tightened further. Insurance guilds raised transit costs until civilian travel became impossible. Navigation beacons along human routes went dark for maintenance. Communication relays lagged, then failed, as service contracts were quietly terminated. Humanity was pushed into isolation. And the Council watched carefully. They expected collapse. They had seen the pattern countless times. A species dependent on interstellar trade fractured quickly once cut off. Economies failed. Colonies turned on one another. Refugees flooded outward, begging for reinstatement. Collapse was not cruelty, it was inevitability. Humanity, with all its divisions and contradictions, should have shattered first. It didn't. Months passed. Then years. There were no refugee armadas. No mass distress calls. No desperate broadcasts pleading for mercy. Instead, human traffic rerouted inward with unsettling coordination. Peripheral colonies, once dismissed as marginal, suddenly became centers of activity. Council analysts flagged the data as anomalous. Supervisors dismissed it. They assumed humanity was burning through reserves in a final, desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. Dying civilizations often appeared productive just before the end. It fit precedent. It fit expectation. Then human space went quiet. Not the chaotic silence of collapse, but something deliberate. No broadcasts. No demands. No threats. No pleas. To the Council, that silence meant confirmation. Finished. Monitoring files were closed. Observers reassigned. Humanity was quietly reclassified as a non-viable civilization, another lesson to present to younger species about the dangers of non-compliance. The Council celebrated, softly at first, then openly. They spoke of restored stability, of order maintained without bloodshed. Humanity became a cautionary tale, cited in policy briefings and academic lectures. No one asked why human industrial output spiked just before the silence. No one questioned why energy readings rose instead of fell. No one wondered why a collapsing species stopped asking for help altogether. They never considered the possibility that humanity had reached a conclusion of its own. That dependence was weakness. That permission was vulnerability. That survival meant removing every system that could be taken away. The Council believed isolation was a punishment. For humanity, it was a purge. Every sanction burned away reliance. Every revoked right stripped illusion. Every closed door forced reinvention. The Council expected collapse. What they created instead was a civilization no longer entangled in the galaxy's fragile web of control, and therefore no longer subject to it. And while the Council celebrated the silence, the stars were beginning to listen. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, there was shock, then anger, then fear. The kind of fear that doesn't scream, but sharpens. When the last Council trade lanes closed and the final appeals vanished into silence, humanity reached a realization that echoed across every world they had ever settled. No one was coming. For centuries, humanity had carried its fractures into the stars. Old nations reborn as colonies. Corporations wielding power rivaling governments. Ideologies transplanted whole onto planets that had never known Earth. Those divisions survived because the galaxy allowed them to, because trade softened consequences and external authority absorbed the cost of failure. Isolation stripped that protection away. When shipments stopped, ideology didn't matter. When jump routes vanished, borders became meaningless. When Council patrols ignored human distress calls, denial gave way to clarity. Division was no longer inefficient. It was fatal. Old divisions vanished, not through revolution or conquest, but necessity. Arguments that once dragged on for decades were resolved in days. Sometimes hours. Not because humanity became kinder, but because survival demanded cooperation. You either worked together, or you didn't survive. Emergency assemblies formed across human space. Not parliaments. Not senates. Coordination councils. They were led not by career politicians, but by people who understood systems. Logisticians who knew how to keep supply chains alive. Engineers who understood what failed first under stress. Medics who knew what shortages actually killed people. The questions were brutally simple. How do we feed everyone? How do we keep power stable? How do we make sure no colony stands alone? Corporations resisted at first. Profit models collapsed without external markets. Some tried hoarding resources. They were outpaced, quickly, by cooperative networks that shared materials and data freely, producing more with less waste. Profit was replaced with continuity. Military forces followed. Fleets that once answered to different flags began operating together out of necessity. Joint patrols became shared commands. Shared commands became permanent structures. Uniforms lost national insignia. Ship hulls lost ownership markings. Culture remained. Identity remained. Authority changed. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't declared. It wasn't voted on. It emerged. Command was not a government. It did not dictate belief, language, or culture. It coordinated survival. When command issued a directive, it was followed, not out of loyalty, but because it worked. Power grids synchronized. Food production stabilized. Manufacturing standards unified. A ship built in one system could be repaired in another without modification. Medical protocols standardized across worlds. Mortality rates dropped even as resources tightened. Humanity stopped functioning like competing states. They began functioning like a single organism. Education shifted almost overnight. Children learned systems thinking before history. Emergency response before politics. Every human learned something practical: fabrication, repair, medicine, logistics. Knowing how to keep something running became as fundamental as language. This wasn't militarization. It was preparation. Because if no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Defense replaced borders. Early warning arrays stretched far beyond mapped space, watching vectors no council doctrine had ever considered threats. Humanity assumed betrayal as a baseline. They assumed isolation would return. They assumed help would not arrive in time. So they built accordingly. The galaxy never noticed. Council observers had been reassigned. Sensor coverage reduced. Reports hinting at unusual coordination were buried under bureaucracy or dismissed as noise. Humanity faded from relevance exactly as the Council expected. And humanity did nothing to correct that assumption. They had learned the value of being underestimated. While the Council congratulated itself on a problem solved, human space grew quieter and stronger. Colonies once separated by light years functioned like neighboring districts. Decisions that once took generations were made in days. Not through tyranny. Through shared responsibility. Isolation had done what centuries of diplomacy never could. It removed the illusion that someone else would step in. In its place, humanity built unity not from ideology, but necessity. Not from obedience, but trust. And when the galaxy finally turned its attention back toward human space, it would not find a fractured species begging for protection. It would find a civilization that had already learned the hardest truth of survival. If no one else will stand for you, you learn to stand together. In silence, humanity evolved. Cut off from the galaxy's noise, human space did not wither, it sharpened. Without markets to impress or rivals to intimidate, progress shed ceremony and focused on function. Every design meeting, every prototype, every failure revolved around one unforgiving question. Will this still work when we are alone? New engines came first. Humanity abandoned the galaxy's obsession with shortcuts through reality. Hyperspace corridors, fold gates, slipstreams that were fast but brittle, elegant but dependent on permission. Humans chose endurance instead. They built drives that pushed directly against spacetime, converting mass, time, and patience into motion. They were slower by council standards. They were inefficient on paper. They never failed. Human ships no longer required lanes, gates, or infrastructure controlled by others. If space existed, they could cross it. Travel became inevitable rather than conditional. They didn't arrive suddenly. They arrived no matter what. Unbreakable shields followed. Not graceful energy veils meant for brief, theatrical battles, but brutal layers of redundancy, fields within fields, reinforced by mass and adaptive algorithms. Human shields didn't try to cancel damage. They absorbed it, redistributed it, learned from it. Every impact fed data back into the system. Kinetic force spread until it died. Energy bled away into harmless radiation. Each strike made the shield better prepared for the next. Failure was not an outcome, it was feedback. Hull plating thickened until vessels resembled drifting continents. Armor wasn't decorative, it was grown, replaced, and grown again. Vital systems were buried beneath ecosystems, farms, reservoirs, fabrication bays, medical wards, so that even catastrophic damage became survivable. Human ships stopped being vehicles. They became worlds that moved. Fleets were built, but not for conquest. There were no banners painted on hulls. No heroic names carved into armor. Ships were designated by function, not legacy. Ark-class carriers protected populations. Foundry fleets manufactured replacements mid-transit. Defense lattices operated as mobile terrain rather than aggressive spearheads. Every loss was anticipated. Every role replaceable. Every ship expendable, except the people inside. Weapons existed, of course. Humanity wasn't naive. But they were designed with restraint. Interdiction fields to halt advance. Area denial arrays to make approach prohibitively costly. Precision null systems to remove threats cleanly and permanently. Humanity did not build weapons to inspire fear. They built weapons to end danger. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Artificial intelligence, once feared, once restricted, was rebuilt under unforgiving principles. No gods. No masters. Partners only. Every system assumed error rather than perfection, betrayal rather than loyalty, failure rather than success. Human oversight was mandatory. Human responsibility absolute. Biology advanced alongside steel. Human physiology adapted quietly. Radiation tolerance increased. Cellular repair accelerated. Immune systems became aggressive, self-updating networks. Humans didn't become visibly different. They became harder to kill. Generations grew up inside this preparation. Children learned fabrication and repair alongside language and mathematics. Emergency response became basic education. Knowing how to keep something running was as fundamental as reading. This was not militarization. It was survival literacy. Beyond human space, the galaxy remained unaware. The Council was busy managing politics, suppressing dissent, and congratulating itself on restored stability. Data that contradicted humanity's supposed collapse was filtered, reinterpreted, or quietly discarded. It was easier not to look. And so the galaxy never saw the fleets forming beyond known maps. Never saw engines that ignored borders. Never saw shields that endured forces capable of shattering moons. Never saw a civilization that had stopped chasing approval and started building permanence. By the time the silence became noticeable, by the time anyone wondered why human space was still there, humanity was no longer preparing to return. They were preparing to endure. And when the stars finally answered that preparation, they would not do so gently. Then a new enemy appeared. There was no warning, no declaration, no ritual challenge broadcast across the stars. One cycle the outer systems reported routine traffic, the next they were screaming, and then they were gone. The first world fell in less than a day. Sensors recorded violent distortions at the edge of the system, followed by fleets that ignored established lanes and known physics alike. The ships were vast and asymmetrical, grown rather than built, their hulls alive with shifting structures that adapted even as they were being observed. They called themselves the Dominion. Worlds fell. Council defense fleets arrived too late, finding only debris where orbital cities and shipyards had once existed. Moons were dismantled for raw material. Planetary cores were tapped with obscene efficiency. Atmospheres burned, not as targets, but as collateral. The Dominion did not conquer. They harvested. Entire systems were stripped clean and left silent behind them. Borders meant nothing. Treaties meant nothing. The Dominion advanced with mechanical certainty, a force that did not slow, did not hesitate, and did not care who ruled what before they arrived. Species were enslaved. Survivors were catalogued with cold precision. Engineers were implanted with neural restraints and forced to maintain Dominion warforms. Soldiers were chemically altered, stripped of identity, and driven back into battle as disposable shock units. Civilian populations were reduced to labor pools, biological components feeding an ever-expanding machine. Those deemed unnecessary were erased. Refugees fled into council space carrying stories too horrific to dismiss. Worlds converted into processing hubs. Cultures erased not by genocide, but by repurposing. Entire histories ended without ceremony. The galaxy panicked. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions that stretched on for cycles. Representatives shouted over one another, demanding action while assigning blame. Ancient species argued over jurisdiction. Younger ones begged for protection. Military blocs refused to commit fleets without guarantees of reimbursement and command authority. The Council argued while systems burned. Votes were proposed. Votes were delayed. Votes were vetoed. Coalitions formed on paper and collapsed in reality. Fleets mobilized too slowly, trapped in layers of protocol designed for limited wars, not extinction. Every decision required consensus, and consensus arrived only after another system went dark. When Council fleets finally engaged the Dominion in force, the results were catastrophic. Entire armadas vanished. Flagships were torn apart mid-transmission. The Dominion sacrificed ships freely, learning from every exchange, adapting faster than Council tacticians could respond. Weapons that had once decided wars barely slowed them. Within a few short cycles, the truth became undeniable. The Council was losing. Worse, they had no idea how to stop it. Then analysts noticed something unsettling. On Dominion expansion maps, there was a void. A vast region of space they did not enter. Not fortified. Not contested. Simply avoided. Advance vectors bent away from it. Probes altered course without explanation. Entire fleets diverted as if responding to a threat no one could see. That region bordered the space humanity had once occupied. The realization spread through the Council chamber like a cold vacuum. Humanity. A species isolated, sanctioned, silenced, and written off as finished. A civilization the Council had pushed into the dark and forgotten. And yet, something about them had caused an empire that devoured stars to hesitate. Reluctantly, desperately, the Council turned to the name they had never planned to speak again. Dormant channels were reactivated. Deprecated frequencies restored. Messages were drafted with extreme care, acknowledging past misunderstandings, emphasizing shared extinction-level risk, appealing to unity and survival. The first message went unanswered. So did the second. Worlds continued to fall. Finally, stripped of pride and pretense, the Council broadcast a single, unfiltered transmission across every channel humanity had ever used. "We need your help." The reply came minutes later. Not from an ambassador. Not from a politician. From a calm, steady voice identified only as command. "We know," the voice said. "We've been watching." Relief surged through the chamber. Councilors spoke at once, offering restored rights, full reintegration, shared authority, anything to secure humanity's aid. The human voice cut through the noise. "You silenced us. You isolated us. You expected us to disappear," command said. "We didn't. What's happening now is not our responsibility." Panic erupted. "If the Dominion wins," a councilor pleaded, "humanity will fall as well." There was a pause, long enough to feel endless. "Yes," command replied. "Eventually." Hope flared. "So you'll help." "We didn't say that," the voice answered. "We said we understand the threat." Council displays changed. Data flooded the chamber. Dominion logistics, behavioral models, structural weaknesses mapped with terrifying precision. Entire campaigns already simulated. Failure points identified. Casualty projections calculated down to decimals. Humanity hadn't just been watching. They had been preparing. "We will engage the Dominion," Command said at last, "because extinction-level threats do not respect borders." Relief washed through the Council. "But understand this," the voice continued, colder now. "This is not a rescue." A pause. "This is an answer." The transmission ended, and as Dominion fleets closed in on the heart of the galaxy, the Council finally understood the truth behind humanity's silence. They hadn't been erased. They hadn't been broken. They had been listening. And now, at last, the stars were about to answer back. The Council expected forgiveness. They believed desperation would wash history clean. That when extinction loomed close enough, old wrongs would blur into irrelevance. Humanity, they assumed, would be furious, but grateful. Ready to return. Ready to help. Ready to forget. What they found instead was resolve. When human channels finally reopened, the Council chamber erupted into frantic motion. Delegates spoke over one another, rushing to offer what had once been denied: restored rights, permanent seats, shared command authority, reparations approved without debate. Concessions that would have taken centuries of negotiation were handed over in minutes. Humanity listened. Then they answered calmly. "We will decide when to act." The words settled over the chamber like vacuum. Council representatives protested immediately. Time was running out. Every delay meant another world lost, another species enslaved. They demanded timelines, fleet movements, guarantees, anything that sounded like control. They received nothing. "Urgency did not save you," the human voice continued, "identified only as command. It blinded you. We will not repeat that mistake." The transmission ended. Fear spread, not the loud kind, but the quiet, suffocating realization that the galaxy's fate was no longer being debated. It was being considered, by a civilization that had learned the cost of haste the hard way. For the first time in galactic history, survival did not rest on ancient authority or political consensus. It rested on humanity's judgment. Far beyond charted space, something began to move. In regions long marked as empty, where gravity maps blurred and sensors returned meaningless static, human constructs awakened. Frameworks seeded during the first days of isolation came online in flawless synchronization, responding to signals that had never been broadcast. Foundries ignited. Stars were tapped, not drained, not destroyed, but shaped. Their output redirected into controlled torrents of power feeding massive structures wrapped in reinforced spacetime fields. Fleets that had never appeared in Council records aligned along vectors no known doctrine had ever defined. Soon after, space itself began to tremble. Not from hyperspace ruptures. Not from weapons fire. From strain. Across the galaxy, sensors screamed as localized distortions appeared in synchronized patterns light-years apart. Reality flexed, stabilized, then flexed again, like a structure being tested beyond its original design limits. Humanity was not mobilizing. They were initializing. The Council finally understood the difference. Whatever humanity was preparing was not a reaction born of panic. It was a solution conceived long ago, refined in silence, and held in reserve for a moment exactly like this. The Dominion qualified. Whether the Council did, no longer mattered. Humanity had not returned seeking forgiveness. They had not emerged to reclaim status or demand restitution. They had returned because something existed that threatened continuity itself. And when they finally acted, it would not be to save the Council. It would be to answer the silence imposed upon them, with a response written in the language of the stars. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. There was no warning flare, no hyperspace rupture, no energetic scream to announce their arrival. One moment, Dominion armadas filled the void, vast, devouring formations advancing toward the last surviving systems. The next moment, humanity was there. Space did not tear open. It yielded. Massive human constructs appeared exactly where they were needed, occupying vectors the Dominion had never considered vulnerable. Arc ships the size of moons locked into formation beside lattice-like defense platforms that spanned entire approach corridors. Foundry fleets settled into the rear, already fabricating replacements for losses that had not yet occurred. They were massive. They were precise. They were unstoppable. Human vessels emitted no recognizable emissions. No drive signatures. No weapons charging. Dominion targeting systems failed to resolve even basic lock-ons, as if the human fleet existed slightly out of alignment with the rules the Dominion understood. They did not advance. They waited. Then a single message crossed every channel. Unencrypted. Unmistakable. Translated instantly into every known language. Stand down. The Dominion answered with annihilation. Entire formations surged forward, sacrificing themselves to break the human line. Planet Cracker lances fired. Reality-warping weapons detonated. Space burned white as the Dominion unleashed everything it had ever used to erase resistance. The human fleet did not move. Their shields flexed, layered fields absorbing, dispersing, and nullifying forces that had shattered stars. Energy bled away into harmless radiation. Kinetic strikes slowed, spread, and died. Human hulls did not glow. Armor did not fracture. Humanity endured. Then they responded. Not with rage. With correction. Regions of space hardened. Dominion ships slowed, then stopped entirely, trapped in zones where physics itself refused to cooperate. Propulsion systems failed. Weapons shut down mid-cycle. Entire fleets froze mid-charge like insects caught in amber. Human counterfire began. It was not a barrage. It was removal. Dominion vessels vanished one by one, erased by localized null events that left no debris, no explosion, only absence. Command ships disappeared first. Control nodes followed. Every strike eliminated something essential. The Dominion attempted to adapt. They always did. But there was nothing to adapt to. Human tactics did not escalate. They did not shift or improvise. They remained constant, methodical, as if the outcome had already been calculated long before the first ship appeared. Retreat vectors collapsed before they could be used. Reinforcements never arrived. Communication across Dominion formations degraded into static and silence. Then the Dominion's command intelligence, an entity believed to span multiple dimensions, went dark. No death cry. No final transmission. It simply stopped. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Across the galaxy, Council sensors struggled to process what they were witnessing. Battles that should have lasted centuries concluded in minutes. Systems once doomed to fall went quiet, not occupied, not conquered, but spared. Human fleets did not pursue. They powered down. A final transmission followed, brief and absolute. The threat has been neutralized. Do not pursue remnants. And then humanity withdrew. Space relaxed. Physics resumed its familiar shape. Human ships vanished as cleanly as they had arrived, leaving behind silence, and survivors who barely understood why they were still alive. The Galactic Council watched in stunned disbelief. Because at last, they understood the answer to the question they had never thought to ask. Humanity had not been silenced. They had been listening. And when the stars finally answered back, they did so in a voice so calm, so final, that even an empire built to consume the universe had no time to realize. It was already over. The Council tried to reclaim control. In the aftermath of the Dominion's erasure, emergency decrees flooded the chambers. Borders were reaffirmed. Authority was restated. Committees formed to oversee reconstruction, threat assessment, and post-crisis governance. The Council spoke as if order had survived because of its wisdom, as if the system had worked. It was too late. The galaxy remembered. Worlds remembered the silence while they burned. Species remembered the debates that outlasted entire civilizations. Survivors remembered who hesitated and who arrived. The Council still had fleets. They still had laws. They still had ancient halls echoing with power. But power, the galaxy had learned, was not the same as relevance. Humanity did not step forward to rule. They declined every offer. Permanent council seats. Supreme military authority. Emergency governance over liberated systems. Each proposal was acknowledged, considered, and refused with the same calm finality. "We are not here to govern," came the final human transmission. Governance creates dependence. Dependence creates failure. Instead, humanity shared what they had learned in silence. Stabilization frameworks capable of repairing planetary damage once thought irreversible. Defensive architectures designed to deter extinction, not invite war. Infrastructure models built around redundancy, not efficiency. Systems meant to endure abandonment, betrayal, and isolation. They helped rebuild. Then they left. Humanity did not replace the Council. They made it unnecessary. Across the galaxy, doctrines changed. Species stopped assuming someone else would protect them. Defense replaced prestige. Preparation replaced complacency. The comforting illusion that safety could be outsourced, to ancient powers, to treaties, to distant authorities, began to die. The Council still existed, but it no longer defined survival. And humanity, they faded back into the dark. Not hiding, not isolated, waiting. Human space remained distant and undefined, its borders unmapped, its fleets unseen. They did not occupy trade routes. They did not demand recognition. They existed beyond known space, where sensors strained and certainty failed. Watching, listening, enduring. The Council never silenced humanity again. They never tried. Because the galaxy now understood a truth that could not be debated, voted on, or forgotten. Humanity did not need to rule to matter. They did not need permission to act. They did not need gratitude to protect existence. They had survived abandonment. They had endured isolation. They had ended an extinction-level threat without becoming conquerors. And that changed the meaning of power forever. So when the stars finally grew quiet again, when the Dominion became a footnote instead of a future, one certainty spread across the galaxy, whispered between worlds and etched into every serious archive. If darkness rises again, if something ancient, merciless, or unimaginable reaches for the stars, humanity will be there. Not as rulers, not as saviors seeking praise, but as the ones who listened when the galaxy went silent, and learned how to answer in a language the universe itself could not ignore.